Star Wars: The Clone Wars is a TV show with 7 seasons that are just full of awesome battles and encounters. So in this video, I'm going to be taking one scene from each season and building it in LEGO. The first scene I want to build comes from Season 1, Episode 21, Liberty on Ryloth. In this episode, Mace Windu is leading an attack on Ryloth against the Separatists. He has a huge convoy of ATTEs and they come under attack as they get closer to the city. Mace Windu jumps on an ATRT and runs up this hill to attack some droids and armored assault tanks. I thought this scene where he was charging towards the droids would be fun to build, so I started by laying down 3 16x16 plates. I didn't want to make builds that are too big for this challenge because I wanted to be able to finish this video in a reasonable amount of time. Lately, I've been used to making bigger and bigger builds, so giving myself some space constraints is going to be a good way to keep me on track. After making a few levels for my terrain and adding some slopes in, I started adding plates and tiles in both tan and dark tan for some color variation. I still had an ATRT for my Christophsis build, so I got Mace Windu positioned above an explosion I built, added a couple droids in, and here's the final result. This build is probably the weakest one of this video because it's pretty basic, but I think it communicates what's happening in the scene, so mission accomplished there, I guess. If I had to redo this, I would definitely pick a different color combination because the droids blend in with the terrain more than I would like. Moving on, for Season 2, I decided to do a scene from Episode 4, which is called Landing at Point Rain. This episode has some epic battle scenes and we get to return to Geonosis again, which is awesome. Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Mundi return to the planet to stop Poggle the Lesser from rebuilding a droid army, but they crash land on their way in and split up. For my build, I wanted to focus on this moment when Mundi exits the caves with some of his clones that are using flamethrowers on the Geonosian warriors. The problem here is that I don't have the clones I need to make this scene. I decided to head over to Clone Army Customs to solve this issue. I grabbed the clones I was missing, headed back home, and I was ready to build. For this build, I used 2 16x16 plates and created a classic black tile border around the edges. Since they are on a cliff in this scene, I wanted to make sure I elevated the terrain right from the start. I filled everything in for a nice thick base to the build with slopes on the front to represent the cliff face. I chose a dark orange and medium nougat color scheme for this build, which is pretty classic for Geonosis builds in LEGO. After creating a few rock formations, I got everything tiled and plated off, placed my figures, and this is how things turned out. Even though this build might be somewhat simple, I think it looks pretty good. Mundi is deflecting a shot from a Geonosian warrior, Commander Jet is about to take out the flying warrior on the right, and I'm happy with how the fire looks coming out of the flamethrower from the clone on the left. Up next we have Season 3. I chose to build a scene from Citadel Rescue, which is Episode 20. Toward the end of the episode, there's a part where Plo Koon comes swooping in with his gunship to save everybody from this small island in the middle of a bunch of yellow lava. There are tons of crab droids swarming the island, and Anakin is the last one still fighting them before he jumps onto the gunship to escape. I had some custom crab droids from my droid army that I built earlier this year, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity to use them. Again, I went for a 32x16 build with a black tile border. I started adding a bunch of trans yellow bricks in for the lava before moving over to the right side of the build to fill everything in with some dark bluish gray. I had some really long gray wedge pieces that I used to represent the rock spikes coming off of the island, and I attached them using mixel joints so I could get some interesting angles. I took the legs off of the back of one of my crab droids to position it so it looked like it was climbing out of the lava, and I set the other one up to attack Anakin. Let's take a look at the final build. I think this build represents the scene perfectly. I like how the colors come together, and I love the design of these crab droids. I'll throw a link in the description if you want to build them for yourself. They're pretty easy to pose, and I think they really sell this scene in LEGO form. Let's move on to Season 4. For this season, as a surprise to probably nobody, I chose the Battle of Umbara. I specifically chose to build a scene representing the battle between the 501st and 212th. The evil Jedi General Krell tricked these two legions into fighting against each other after he told them that the Umbarans had stolen their clone brother's armor and were trying to infiltrate their ranks. The clones ended up fighting against each other only to realize that they had been lied to, which was unfortunately after the damage was already done. I chose to go for a 32x16 build with black tile border again. I had a bunch of these black slopes, so I used them to create a few different points of elevation, and then I tiled off the rest of the build to give it a shiny, smooth look. Next, I added figures onto the build so I could figure out where I wanted all of my foliage to go. Umbara is a super dark planet with a bunch of brightly colored plants, so I decided to use pink and purple plants to brighten things up a little bit. I mixed in a ton of black vine and tentacle looking pieces, and here's the final result. I think this build looks super clean. You can instantly tell that it's Umbara. It was also fun to finally use all my new clone specialists in a build, even though this all represents events leading up to one of the most depressing scenes in the entire TV show. For season 5, I knew instantly that I wanted to build Gregor's final stand from episode 12, Missing in Action. Gregor looks awesome in his Clone Commando attire, and I picked up his custom figure from Clone Army Customs just a few months ago. In this scene, he goes up against a bunch of droids all by himself, and he takes out a ton of them before using some explosives to take care of the rest of them. I used one 16x16 plate, making this the smallest build of the video. I added a black border around the edges, created a grid with tiles and grates, and started building a few crates. Gregor gets attacked by a bunch of droids in this episode, but right toward the end of the battle, he's hiding behind a few crates and he's taking out tons of enemies. This build is simple, but it looks very similar to the source material, and I like how it focuses on a small part of a much larger battle. I love how this droid looks as it's being blown away, and I think anyone who's a fan of Gregor would recognize this scene right away. For season 6, I had a harder time choosing a build. There are only 13 episodes in season 6, unlike the 5 seasons that come before it that had 20 episodes each. Also, so many of the episodes in this season use characters that are abstract and weird or just don't have their own minifigures. I settled on episode 10, which is called Lost Ones. There's a pretty cool lightsaber battle that takes place between Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Dooku. They fight near this massive ledge, and there's some cool colors on the platform that I thought would be fun to include. I wanted to try something a little bit different for this build just to show how high up this fight was taking place. I thought it would be fun to have the entire build held up by 2 pillars similar to the ones we see in the scene. I decided to go for a slightly different color scheme and ended up using blue for the lit up portion since I didn't have anywhere near enough of the right green color to achieve the look that I was going for. Once I had the pillars started, I built out the entire platform, got my main elements placed, and finished building up the pillars to get them to a good height. I got everything tiled off, placed the minifigures, and this is how it turned out. I have Obi-Wan hanging off the edge of the platform using the Force to grab his lightsaber just like he does in the fight. Dooku and Anakin are fighting in the center of the build, framed in pretty nicely by the pillars on either side of them. I like how unique this build is compared to the other ones and love the rounded look to things. Maybe it's not the most recognizable scene ever, but this was definitely a fun one to build. Moving on to season 7, there are so many great options with iconic scenes. Even though I had tons of ideas, I decided it was time to build a scene that I've been wanting to build for ages. That scene is none other than Maul's Venator Rampage from episode 11, where he goes up against a bunch of clone troopers using nothing but the Force. He takes out everyone opposing him by throwing them around, smashing them with panels, and he even decapitates these 2 guys. I started out putting some plates down for the floor structure and began building the lights that we see on the walls of the hallway. I added some modified 1x2 bricks for texture and tiled off the top to hold everything together. After mocking up my figure placement, I built a couple panels that Maul used in the scene to block oncoming fire from the clones and placed them on top of some clear round bricks to make it look like they were floating. I tiled off the floor, got everything into place, and this is what I ended up with. This might just be my favorite build of this entire video. I had the right figures to include in the scene. I think the hallway looks great, and I feel like I couldn't have really done this any better even if I tried. Which build was your favorite? Let me know in the comment section down below. I have so many ideas for more Clone Wars builds to make in future videos, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on them. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I hope you have a good one.